west commences, and gaze at the and I
Live from Toronto, Canada, The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio, AM 740.
And welcome to the Audio Imaginarium. Come on in, weary traveler. Hang your cloak on a peg, grab a stool, and come warm yourself by the fire. There are stories to be told, and you are among friends. Well, Happy New Year. Hope you all had a wonderful, blessed, joyous Christmas. Nativity of our Lord, as we say. Hanukkah. Happy Hanukkah. All the best to you and yours for 2018 from all of us here on The Conspiracy Show to all of you. It's been years since I've been off for 2 weeks, not counting my bout with pneumonia a few years ago. So much going on that under even normal circumstances, it's impossible to cover it off, to cover everything that's going on with a 2-hour weekly show. So it really starts to pile up when the show is in hiatus for a couple of weeks, I'll tell you that. One of the big stories, of course, that dropped near the end of 2017 had to do with a secretive UFO study conducted deep within the bowels of the Pentagon. And that story broke December 16th in the New York Times. I'll read that to you in just a moment, in case you've been living in an emergency fallout bunker for the last several weeks. But first, let me say hello and introduce you to the boys in the band. On the Flying V Gibson guitar, Ian Robertson. Hello, Ian. Happy New Year. Welcome. And, of course, here in studio on the Rickenbacker bass guitar and occasionally the theremin, the inscrutable Albert Vinzel, my story producer. And last, but certainly not least, on the Hammond B3, feature producer, and he runs our Hangout on Air, our live YouTube stream, Ryan White. Gentlemen, good to have you all back. How was your New Year and your Christmas, Albert?
Oh, good. It was, I went to my sister's in Whitby, Oshawa, and had, turkey dinner.
All right. And Ryan, yours?
Excellent. Lots of fun time with the family. Really nice stuff. I got a cool telescope I'm looking forward to setting up sometime in the summer.
Ah, an amateur astronomer. All right. And Ian, how about you? How was your holiday?
Like the other gentleman, family time and lots of turkey.
Come on, this is the Conspiracy Show. We're so boring.
I read a bunch of stuff about Sam Cooke.
Cool. All
His
right.
death.
Yes.
Could be a segment in the future.
All right. We'll look into that.
Yeah.
All right. Yes, he did die under rather unsavory conditions back in 1965.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that, Ian. All right. We have to work on our private lives. This is, we're supposed to be, our lives are supposed to be filled with intrigue and subterfuge, and we're constantly having to look over our back shoulder or our shoulder and hire people to start our cars in the morning and so forth. All right. Let's get to this New York Times story. As I mentioned, back in December the 16th, Dateline Washington, and the headline, Glowing Auras and Black Money, the Pentagon's Mysterious UFO Program. And the writers, Helen Cooper, who is the New York Times Pentagon correspondent, and then we have Ralph Blumenthal, who is now a contributor, but prior to that, he was for 45 years a staff writer with the Times. And then, of course, researcher, journalist Leslie Kean, the author of Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. So allow me here then to crib from the New York Times article, if I can get my computer working here. Here we are. In the $600 billion annual defense budget, the $22 million spent on the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program was impossible to find. And that's exactly how the Pentagon wanted it. For years, the program investigated. I'm having a little difficulty with my computer here. It's not cooperating. Anyway, so the idea was that for years, this program was investigating reports of UFOs. And this is according to Defense Department officials. And the records that were obtained by the New York Times indicate a military intelligence official, Luis Elizondo, was working, as I say, deep within the Pentagon's bowels, the C ring, as it's known. And the Defense Department has never before acknowledged the program. Now, it says it shut it down back in 2012 when the Pentagon ended funding for the effort, but others insist that this project remains in existence. And for the past 5 years, the program, having continued to investigate episodes of UFO sightings and so forth, and parts of this shadowy program remain classified. Again, it was largely funded at the request of former Democrat Senator Harry Reid of Nevada. He was the Senate Majority Leader at the time. And he has had a self-described interest in space phenomena. And most of the $22 million went to an aerospace research company run by a billionaire friend of Mr. Reid's, Robert Bigelow. We're familiar with Mr. Bigelow and, of course, his appearance on CBS's 60 Minutes back in May of 2017, when he said that he was convinced that aliens exist and that UFOs have visited the Earth. And officials with the program have also said to have studied unknown objects and American military aircraft back in August. This was released back in August. An encounter with a whitish oval object about, it was chased by 2 Navy FA-18F fighters. And this was off the coast of San Diego back in 2004. Mr. Reid, who retired from Congress back in 2017, I guess it was, said, "I'm not embarrassed or ashamed." He said, "I'm proud of this program." He said, "Things that I did, this is one of the best things I've done in my congressional service. No one has ever done anything like this before." Well, we're going to delve into this. Here's what we know in summary. The Pentagon has acknowledged for the first time the existence of a program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. The program is tasked with investigating UFOs and their potential threats. The government insists it cut off funding for the program in 2012 after just 5 years, but it wasn't completely shut down. And the official in charge of the program, as I mentioned, Luis Elizondo, supposedly resigned in October. So for the next hour, 2 hours, in fact, my story producer, Albert Vinzel, has put together a stellar roundtable. And let me introduce the panel, one at a time, of course. Joining us from Mexico, one of Canada's most thoughtful, passionate UFO disclosure advocates, the executive director of Zealand Communications and the Zealand News Network, a good friend of the program, Victor Viggiani. Victor, Happy New Year. How are things in Mexico?
Just fine and nice and warm, Richard. Nice and warm.
Sure, rub it in. Welcome. It's good to hear your voice once again.
Great to be with you.
Derek Gilbert hosts SkyWatchTV, a Christian television program that airs on several national networks, and co-hosts SciFriday, a weekly television program that analyzes science news with his lovely wife, author Sharon K. Gilbert. Derek is the author of the best-selling book, The Great Inception, Satan's PSYOPs from Eden to Armageddon. And he's a contributing author to the anthologies God's Ghostbusters, Blood on the Altar, When Once We Were a Nation. And I predict what 12 global experts believe you will see by 2025. He is the co-author of a brand new one, The Day the Earth Stands Still, Unmasking the Old Gods Behind ETs, UFOs, and the Official Disclosure Movement. Derek, welcome back to The Conspiracy Show. How are you?
Richard, it's an honor to be here. Thank you very much.
And thank you. Let's get co-author Josh Peck in here. Josh is an avid researcher of fringe topics, works in full-time ministry at SkyWatchTV, hosts Into the Multiverse, and has authored numerous books, including Unraveling the Multiverse and Abaddon Ascending, co-authored with best-selling author Tom Horn. Josh specializes in theological and scientific studies such as quantum physics to explain paranormal phenomena. And again, Josh is the co-author of The Day the Earth Stands Still. The secret effort behind official disclosure is revealed at last, and we'll get into this book as well. And Josh, welcome to you. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure and honor.
My first question is, are we all making too much of this? Some in the disclosure movement are calling this official disclosure. Some are saying this was nothing more than a crooked and corrupt Senator Harry Reid finding a creative way to give his pal Robert Bigelow $22 million in taxpayer money. Victor, let me start with you. Are we making too much of this secret Pentagon UFO study? Maybe we're not making enough to do about it? What are your thoughts?
Well, Richard, anytime this whole idea of quote-unquote disclosure with a large D comes up, it doesn't matter when and how it comes up, especially in terms of what our good friend Stephen Bassett has done over the past 15 to 20 years regarding his efforts to bring about disclosure in Washington, D.C. with the Senate hearings, the congressional hearings that he held, with the adventure, the We the People adventure, trying to get the White House to admit that they're wrong on the UFO count. Every single time any one of these efforts ever comes up, and they've come up many, many times before, there always seems to be some form of short circuitry going on. And by that I mean some sort of efforts by whomever, be it the general public or the media, or just skeptics. They're all over the place. It always lands up being some sort of large critique of any effort to bring about an open dialogue about the disclosure movement. And I think any criticism of those efforts that I just mentioned, and this effort too, are completely unfounded, because anytime we want to begin to start a dialogue among the entire human family about the existence of off-world sentient beings visiting our planet, we cannot criticize those efforts. They may not be exactly the way we want them to be crafted in terms of financing and who finances them and how they get financed. But the fact of the matter is, our government has been lying to us about this for over 70 years, and any effort, in my humble opinion, to get this information out, any form of dialogue, and I underscore the word any 3 times, is something that we need to investigate and pursue as a public discourse. So I don't think we're making enough of this in terms of what the entire possibility of array of discourse that can happen with respect to the UFO phenomenon and the need for open disclosure about this particular issue.
All right, Victor Viggiani, thank you for that. I will get to Derek and Josh. Derek Gilbert, Josh Peck, co-authors of The Day the Earth Stands Still, after this timeout. And we'll continue our 2-hour roundtable discussion on the secret UFO Pentagon study. Back with more of The Conspiracy Show. My name is Richard Syrett. Stay with us.
The truth is not out there. It's right here. The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
I didn't expect a retirement community to be a good fit for me. I just didn't think I'd be comfortable.
Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
Welcome back. What a panel. Albert Vinzel, good job. Victor Viggiani is joining us, Executive Director of Zealand Communications. He's joining us live from Mexico and the Mayan Riviera, I believe, and on the phone as well. Joining us, Derek Gilbert and Josh Peck, co-authors of The Day the Earth Stands Still. And we'll tell you how to get that book, and we'll delve into it a little bit as well. We're going the full 2 hours on the Pentagon's secret UFO study. This was a story that was revealed by the New York Times back on December the 16th. Helene Cooper, the New York Times Pentagon correspondent, Ralph Blumenthal, longtime staff reporter with the Times, 45 years, and Leslie Kane, a respected journalist and UFO author. Generals, pilots, and government officials go on the record. And this again revealed in December of 2017 that the Pentagon had spent $22 million studying UFOs. And this was done at the behest of former Senator Harry Reid of Nevada. The bulk of that $22 million apparently went to his friend, billionaire, aerospace entrepreneur Robert Bigelow. And you'll recall that back in May of 2017, on CBS's 60 Minutes, no less, Bigelow said that he's convinced that aliens exist. So the timing is kind of interesting. We have, of course, Bigelow's appearance on 60 Minutes. We have the exploits of Tom DeLonge, former frontman of rock group Blink-182, who quit the band back in 2015 and decided to dedicate his life towards UFO disclosure. And it's interesting that the man at the center of this story, Luis Elizondo, who was the military intelligence expert, who's sort of the whistleblower on this and resigned in October from this Pentagon study group, has since joined. He's since joined up with Tom DeLonge's group. Isn't that right, Victor?
Exactly correct. Yeah. Make no doubt about it. It was a very big move, and we're not exactly sure of the dynamics. If you listen to some of the videos that DeLonge has put out about this, exactly how the entire team was put together, the To the Stars Academy. But it sure is something that appears to mean business. Now, once again, as I said earlier, how they constructed this and what their apparent motives might be, we'll only be, glad to see exactly how this turns out eventually. But the fact of the matter is, they're digging deeper than anyone ever has, as far as I'm concerned, especially with the mention of CBS. My criteria has always been, as someone who studies the media intensely, that once the UFO ET issue, call it what you wish, appeared on CBS News, namely 60 Minutes, as in the Bigelow interview, once this issue hit 60 Minutes, it was, in my terms, the cork off the bottle, or the genie out of the bottle. I think it was a massive move on Bigelow's part, not only to come through and say what he said, but to say it in such conviction that he really doesn't care what anybody thinks. This is his belief, firm belief, and he's going to stick to that. He's going to stick to that belief.
All right, let's get to Derek Gilbert, Josh Peck, co-authors of The Day the Earth Stands Still. Let's start with you first, Derek. Are we making too much of this Pentagon disclosure? Not enough? What are your thoughts?
No, I'm glad that Josh and I are both glad to see that this is getting the kind of attention that it does, because it's a phenomenon that really needs more discussion. Now, Josh and I come at this from an unabashedly Christian perspective, but we're not the only ones who are looking at the phenomena. And first of all, saying that there is something going on here. We're not definitely not saying that there is nothing to the UFO phenomenon. There certainly something is. We just want to follow where the evidence leads, and I think in the course of discussion, have an opportunity to express our analysis of the research, the analysis of what information is coming to light. I don't think it's unfair to ask about the motives of the folks involved in it. Just as good researchers and good journalists, investigators, what have you. We just need to ask the questions and not accept everything at face value. And I think it's fair to ask, what motives might be behind the timing of the information release, the fact that Mr. Elizondo was connected to the release and the disclosure as soon as he joined this for-profit venture headed up by Tom DeLonge. And I don't think it's unfair to point out that there is a very heavy intelligence community presence on the board of directors of this new venture. I think and this is perhaps me being skeptical. I mean, I started in the media in 1980 as a newsman, and over time I've learned that, different facts are interpreted differently by different people, depending on their point of view. And that includes me and Josh, of course. But when you look at the presence of the intelligence community veterans on the To the Stars Academy, you've got a couple of different ways you can analyze that bit of information. Either this is a group of gentlemen who have great expertise in this field, and they certainly do, who are perhaps using that expertise now to launch a business venture and perhaps educate the public about this phenomenon. Or perhaps it's the intelligence community taking another avenue toward shaping the narrative, which, as Victor pointed out, they've been doing for the last 70 years.
Josh, your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think we're making too much about it at all. Actually, I'm glad that this stuff is talked about more openly now than it has been, well, frankly, ever. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that anytime you would hear anything on a serious news, media TV show, CNN or Fox News or anything, if they did report anything on UFOs or anything, it was usually laughed at, or it was kind of treated as like this goofy thing. In light of recent events, this is the first time that I've actually seen it taken seriously by a lot of major news networks and stuff, which is, it's phenomenal. But to go along with what Derek was saying is, it's really important to know that when stuff is reported on, or when we hear, people like Tom DeLonge give his opinion. I mean, we even went into the WikiLeaks emails in our book, The Day the Earth Stands Still, and we printed Tom DeLonge's emails from the WikiLeaks. Now, these are private emails, so he didn't have any reason to try to put on some facade or something like that. I do believe that, at least, I do believe his interest in UFOs is genuine, but I also think he, like many others, maybe without realizing it, is treating it more like a religion than a scientific venture, which is fine. I mean, they could do that. People are free to do that. Derek and I certainly push our religious views, and we have a religious bias as well, being Christians. But part of why we wrote the book is to show that this isn't as scientific as some might think. The way that it's been interpreted is more spiritualized. So let's say that this is the first step towards official disclosure. I don't know that that's ever going to happen. If it does, I think it'll be extremely complicated, and there's not going to be a simplistic answer for everything. But let's say that this is the first step towards something real. What we tackle in the book is, no matter what information comes out, or the many different ways that an official disclosure scenario could pan out, even up to extraterrestrials landing on the White House lawn and speaking with us directly, we're still going to be given an interpretation of the truth by people reporting on it. We're still going to be given some sort of slant or bias. Now, Derek and I are totally upfront about our bias in this. We take a Christian worldview, but that's not to say that we don't have the traditional Christian view of just saying, well, it's all demons, and we don't need to talk about it beyond that. We don't take that. We don't take that trajectory. We think that there is something real and tangible going on, something even physical in some cases going on, and something that can't be explained always by things within our physical reality. So we're a little different in that sense, but we're very upfront in the book about where our personal bias comes from. So we're trying to show that everybody, you know, everybody who deals in this topic has some sort of slant like that, has some sort of bias.
Sure.
And
obviously, this whole
like,
thing has become, you know,
like,
sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
sorry.
Finish your thought.
Okay, well, like Derek was saying, you know, we just want to show that if and when official disclosure does happen, there's still going to be that same type of interpretation. It's not going to be this type of, you know, well, the truth is out now and now we all know. There's still going to be a lot of questions, probably more questions than you know, that we have than now. So it's important to look at it, you know, through that lens and see that in a lot of ways. And again, not saying this is necessarily a bad thing or a wrong thing or that we're condemning it. I mean, you know, people are free to, you know, do what they want and talk about things the way they want to. But a lot of times this topic is handled more like a religion than a scientific venture. That came out in the WikiLeaks emails. That came out in a lot of our research, and that even comes out in the abduction and UFO experiences themselves.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, Victor, but I know how long you have toiled to get a serious journalistic treatment of this subject, and so I think on one level, what you're saying is, again, not to put words in your mouth, but okay, yes, we can argue about, you know, what the politics are here and who's working what angle, but let's at least for now, just take a moment, a step back, and let's just celebrate the fact that it is being treated at a serious journalistic level. The New York Times, there's no tongue in cheek. They are reporting this in a very, very straightforward, serious manner. Let's celebrate that fact first, and then we can sort of step back and maybe you know, sift through the entrails. Is that about right, Victor?
You've actually put the words right into my mouth, Richard. Actually, that's exactly the perspective that I've taken over the past 35 to 40 years in my examination of this extremely complex issue. And I think we're hearing from you know, several different points of view here, and it's much like, if I could use the whole Christian or Christian Judeo in Genesis of Joseph's coat of many colors. That's what we have here. We have a coat of many, many different colors. And I don't think it's inappropriate to really look at it from as many different perspectives as we possibly can, because we know how many disparate groups are in fact out there who want to believe certain things about what this phenomenon, whatever it might be, really is. And the more different perspectives we begin to talk about, we engage dialogue about, will bring clarity to this issue. And that's all that we at Zealand Communications seek. You know, it doesn't matter about the motives and all of that. That's all secondary dialogue. What we need to do is get the discussion moving around it so that the human family can begin to discuss this in a rational way. And my impression is that good journalism is probably not science, not religion necessarily, not cultural bias, but I think good journalism has always brought us to the precipice of understanding the crises that we're faced, be it a world war or be it, you know, a catastrophe of some other kind. Good journalism always takes us to the door, and then it's up to humanity to decide what kind of information, not necessarily evidence. I really don't like that word evidence, but the information that's necessary to bring people to a point of clarity about the fact that that we're not alone in the universe, and that for some strange, inexplicable reason, these beings, whatever they are and their craft, are here among us. And we have to come to grips with that, no matter how we interpret how the information comes to us.
Agreed. But here's the thing that concerns me, and that is that we've sort of seen this movie before in different iterations, and a number of times it sort of ended badly. Let's say, for example, the Roswell slides. There have been other incidents. It's almost like we were being set up as if someone is creating a straw dog, or a straw man, straw man, in order then to tear it down, and then it can further set back the whole UFO disclosure movement. Let me give you an example. We're talking about this Luis Elizondo, and my good friend John Rappaport, who's not with us tonight, but of No More Fake News, he's with us on the program a number of times. And here's what he writes, and I thought it was rather insightful. He says, for far too long, Government insiders who offer UFO revelations have been given a free pass. They should be treated like any other sources for breaking stories. Your information is fascinating, but I have lots of questions about you and your background. There is a history of these insiders spreading disinformation or lies mixed with truth. This is how intelligence and propaganda operatives work. For instance, they could present tidbits about actual UFO sightings, along with false claims about recovering alien bodies. Those latter claims would be part of their covert agenda. Here are questions Mr. Elizondo should respond to. Mr. Elizondo, in your extensive high-level work as an intelligence case officer, did you ever plant stories in the press? False stories? If not, let me put it to you this way. If you had seen the value of planting a false story in order to move a covert operation forward, would you have done it? Mr. Elizondo, you resigned from the Pentagon in October. Almost immediately, you began revealing secret UFO information to the public and the press. What about your non-disclosure agreements with the government? You violated them, didn't you? Do you have permission from the government to ignore these agreements? If so, how did you arrange that? If not, what has the government told you about your violations? Again, this is John Rappaport from No More Fake News. I thought all very legitimate, important questions that should be put to Mr. Elizondo, to anyone who has access. What are your thoughts on that, Victor?
Well, he's really providing us with a series of questions from someone within an agency that knows a whole lot more about this than most people. And I think those are, in fact, legitimate questions. But I think one of the overriding questions, Richard, is who, in fact, or what agencies, in fact, have the influence and power to, as one of your guests just mentioned, who has the power to frame this issue the way they want. I think that's one of the key issues in the whole discourse.
Right.
What kind of lens are we being forced to look through to interpret how the UFO ET issue is being framed by the secret government, by the military, by whomever is in control of the way this information flows? And I think that is a very, very key question. And if anyone who's involved into the STARS program, they need to answer those questions too, because they definitely are part of a controlled mechanism as to how this information is coming out. And I think you and I both know that anytime the government, be they intelligence agencies or the military, whatever, gets their fingers into this pie, you can definitely make sure that pie will be tainted in one way or another. And as soon as you taste the pie, you drink the Kool-Aid, you become part of the problem. And I think that's part of the issue here. And I go back to my previous point. I think it's a key point to understand some of the great researchers that we have, some of the great journalists that we have. These are the ones that are going to bring that issue into focus and really kind of tease out how the military and how the secret government is forcing us to interpret what this UFO issue might be and remove some of the bias. I know we can't remove all of the bias all the time. I'm not painting journalists as the knight in shining armor that's going to clarify everything for us. But really, it's the only mechanism that we have. It's the only vehicle towards some kind of quote unquote truth what this issue might be. And so those questions that are being asked of that individual, Mr. Alessandro, I think are legitimate questions, but even when he answers, how will he be able to defend who he has been with over the past several years and what his agenda is? So there's a multiple numbers of ways we can look at it. And I go back to my point once again, that journalists are the ones that will be able to tease this out for us and allow the public to decide where the information is coming from and what the biases are.
Over to you, Derek. We're coming up on a break, but let's just hear from you now, and then we'll continue after the break. What are your thoughts on?
Briefly,
yeah.
This is something that we didn't go into great detail into in the book because it wasn't the primary focus of the book, but we did touch on a number of government agencies, specifically Joint Security Control, which is documented in an FBI memo from July of 1947 that this particular government Department of Defense agency, which was tasked with the type of deception that we worked against the Nazis on D-Day to conceal where we were attacking from, was before the end of July 1947 already interfacing with the FBI about investigating UFOs. So this Department of Defense agency, whose mission was to deceive, was involved at the very beginning of the modern UFO phenomenon to try to shape the narrative. So we just wanted to point out that as we look at this phenomenon, we need, as critical thinkers, to ask the question, how is this narrative being shaped, and for what reason might the government want to get us to believe a particular thing about the UFO phenomenon.
Well, Josh, pick up on that thread. What does the U.S. government, or at least this particular branch of the U.S. government, perhaps, what do they want us to think about this phenomenon?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of it is political in nature. I think because we see this a lot in other areas, outside of extraterrestrials and UFOs. For example, the Roswell, and we probably don't have enough time before the break to get too heavily into it, but I'll just say briefly that there would have been good reasons that the U.S. government might have wanted the public to think that it was an extraterrestrial craft that crashed on Roswell. Now, I've heard compelling arguments both ways, so I mean, I'm open to both possibilities. But in the book, we try to go where the evidence leads. And on that point, I'll quickly say too that we do handle this from a Christian standpoint, but that doesn't mean that we're opposed or that we're even discounting the possibility of actual extraterrestrial life. We deal with that heavily in the book, and we could get into it later if you're interested. But
on that point, note, let me go to break. But let me say, sure. I can safely say, all four of us on the panel are Christians. We will pick this up on the other side. The co-authors of The Day the Earth Stands Still, Derek Gilbert, Josh Peck, and the executive director of Zealand Communications, Victor Viggiani, as we discuss the Pentagon UFO study right here on The Conspiracy Show.
Question everything. This is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett on Zoomer Radio. For more from Zoomer Radio.
Welcome back. We don't do this often, and that is go the full 2 hours on a single subject, but we have assembled our tremendous panel here. Victor Viggiani from Zealand News Network. And Victor, quickly, how can we read your blogs and your dispatches on Zealand News Network?
Well, basically, if our listeners, Richard, want to just Google Zealand Communications, all one word, Zealand and then Communications, they can get to all of our press releases and editorials on that one particular site.
And Derek Gilbert, Josh Peck, co-authors of The Day the Earth Stands Still, the secret effort behind official disclosure is revealed at last. And let me go back to you, Victor. If you're the editor at the New York Times, and now it's time for a follow-up on this blockbuster article that came out December the 16th, what are you gonna ask your marching orders for Helene Cooper, Ralph Blumenthal, and Leslie Kean?
Well, I've given that a lot of thought because in a sense I anticipated that question because and I like the way, I believe it was Derek mentioned it a few minutes earlier, is how this narrative will be framed. And what I would do if I was the editor of that particular newspaper, what I would challenge all the writers who are interested in doing this, not just for the New York Times, but all media in general, is to raise the level of conversation about this. And I think by that I mean engaging in a form of discourse that really forces us to ask the really big questions about what's really going on here, irrespective of motives, money, finance, and all of that. I think these writers have to get to the core of what this issue really means to us as a human family, irrespective of government and all the controls of intelligence agencies and that whole entire quagmire. And there are at least 5 major questions that I think these journalists have to begin to raise in a coherent and rational way. The first one is, we're talking about the fate of the planet. Are we in a recovery mode here, or are we going to continue with extinction behaviors that will decimate the planet? Second of all, what's the meaning and the use of money with this concept of an economy? Is it a relevant issue to us as a human family? Do we need the kind of economy that we have right now based on a cyclical war economy? Our own place in the universe, when we discover that we're not alone. Who are we as a race, as a species? And I think that the very key question is, who or what is this thing that we call a creator? Now, that may be tough for journalists to approach, but it really speaks to, this whole issue speaks to where have we come from as corporeal and non-corporeal beings. And finally, I guess there's the whole idea of the juxtaposition of the corporeal existence that we enjoy right now versus the non-corporeal or spiritual existence that we may enjoy after these containers that we're all living in right now are completed or brought to an end. I mean, those are 5 key questions that we have to raise in order to really understand what the quantum presence of what this issue is all about. And I think we have to set aside the older arguments that many researchers have been involved in for over the past 35 to 40 years and raise the level of conversation. So that would be my challenge to them, Richard.
Well, those are all great questions, and those are things that, we discuss on this show. Those are the subject of film and literature for perhaps centuries. But doesn't that presuppose that the pilots of these UFOs are not United States, pilots? That these are not highly sophisticated Air Force craft of some sort. Isn't that presupposing that they're extraterrestrial or that they're interdimensional or something like that?
Well, I think that argument is fairly easy to deal with, Richard, because if you're talking about the last 25 to 30 years, perhaps even 40 years, there may be an argument to say that some of these craft that we're seeing in the air are in fact experimental craft piloted by human beings with exhibiting technologies that we're just not aware of. That's been sort of the military persona for a long time, and I would definitely espouse that particular point of view, that some of the craft that we are seeing are in fact our own craft. But it does not address the issue that perhaps our other guests could raise, that these craft have been in existence and been seen culturally over millennia. They have been here long before man even entertained the idea of flight. So, in the ancient literature, in many of the the Mayan culture, as a matter of fact, every single culture, native culture on the planet, has some sort of storytelling that involves things that come from the sky. And I think that we're at our own peril if we dismiss that entire anthropological argument about where these craft are from, who they might be, and what these beings are all about. So I think that the whole idea of experimental craft is a good one, but I don't think it completely explains the ET question completely.
Derek, this is now we're sort of getting into your wheelhouse about, I guess, the origin of these craft and the whole ancient alien or ancient astronaut theory. And again, we're coming up on a break. This was a short segment, but let's begin this discussion now. We'll continue afterwards, obviously. Did you want to address some of the things that Victor pointed out?
No, we would absolutely agree with Victor in that we cannot explain all of the sightings and all of the craft that people have seen through natural means or as experimental craft. Well, obviously as experimental craft that the government would have an interest in concealing from say the Russians and the Chinese. But to get back to Victor's 5 questions, and I think these are very insightful questions that he would like asked of the witnesses to these events, researchers or rather journalists as they investigate this particular topic, because especially his final 3 questions are essentially the questions that everyone asks who are searching for a meaning that's bigger than themselves, a meaning to life. In other words, religion. Where do we come from? Why are we here? Are we going to keep going this way, or is there some meaning to existence beyond just trying to get by each day and have enough to eat and a place to sleep? Is there some meaning to our existence? And thirdly, what happens when we die? What happens when these corporeal shells that we inhabit are no longer with us?
All right, let's delve into those when we come back. Sorry, this was a short segment. The Day the Earth Stands Still, Derek Gilbert, Josh Peck. Joining us also Victor Viggiani, Executive Director of Zealand Communications. Back with more of our 2-hour roundtable discussion on the secret Pentagon UFO study, right here on The Conspiracy Show.
The truth will set you free, but first, it will really tick you off. You're listening to The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
Trouble.
This is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett on Zoomer Radio.
All right, I want to turn this over to Derek and Josh for a moment here and talk about those final 3 questions that Victor said that we should really be addressing in a serious manner. And one is sort of the nature of creation. Who is the creator? What is the creator? Second, sort of the trajectory of human history and where we are going as a planet and as a civilization. Third, I guess, has to do with, what was the third one? Our corporeal nature.
What happens when we die?
What happens when we die? If we frame that sort of within the UFO arena, aren't we sort of getting into what you referred to earlier, Derek and Josh, and that is sort of ufology as a religion?
Absolutely, and that's why we addressed it in the book, and I'll turn this to Josh in a second, but just want to point out that when you look at recent studies, and was it 2012, National Geographic Channel did a survey of American adults and found that 36% of us believe that we're being visited by ETs. The Barna Group, which researches what Christians in America believe, found that only 10% of American adults have a biblical worldview, which they defined as holding 6 key tenets of Christian theology, things like Jesus lived a sinless life, was born of a virgin, Satan is a literal entity and not just a concept or a force. So when you look at it from that perspective and realize that many people are turning to the UFO phenomenon to answer those big questions of life. Where do we come from? What happens when we die? You know, is there a meaning to my existence beyond what I see in my workday life? There are more people who are turning to ET than to the God of the Bible to get those answers.
Josh, jump in.
Yeah, so this is part of what we dealt with in the book too, just kind of the theological, nature of the whole UFO, ET, life on other planets question. And again, from me and Derek's standpoint, we're not the type of Christians that are threatened by the idea of life on other worlds. We actually deal quite a bit with it in the book as a possibility. Now, that word possibility, we kind of keep it there. Probability, at least in the sense of, are we being visited? No, probably not. And we look at the evidence. Now, we do believe that we're being visited by something. Whether it's extraterrestrial or not, we deal with that heavily in the book and actually go through the evidence to say it's likely. I believe that we build a strong case for the extra-dimensional hypothesis. But the theology of this, if you look at those questions, and this again is why we kind of make the case in the book that this should be at least certain interpretations of this phenomena should be treated as a religion rather than a scientific venture. Sure, there are people in there, out there trying to study this scientifically, as well they should. But again, these aren't things that can be recreated in the lab. At least not yet. We don't have, as far as we know, any kind of extraterrestrial body that we can study. Now, maybe the government has something like that, and who knows? But even if they did, there would be interpretations of that as well. So a lot of this, it starts with where do we come from? Now, in me and Derek's view, we're created in the image of God, and that's a big part of why we're not threatened by the possibility of life on other worlds, because it doesn't threaten our position as imagers of God, or God's imagers, God's representations on earth as if he were here today. That certainly doesn't mean that we are God or anything like that, but that we're God's creation, and we have this office called the image of God that we hold here on earth. And
moral agents, if you will. Yeah, moral agents. Yeah, and this goes for every human being on earth. Even people of other religions. I mean, this is just man is created in God's image. Now, whether they accept that or deny that, that's up to the individual. But in the ET view, if ET created us, I mean, what would it be? The best we could consider ourselves are an experiment. They would be absentee mothers and fathers, because they left. Without any direct line to them, I mean, some could make the case that, well, God left too, but there's the whole Jesus dying on the cross thing. So we don't have an alien gray doing the same thing. So I mean, it answers the question in a fundamentally different way that we talk about logically and philosophically in the book. Is this really better? And again, this is just for people who sort of
treat the ET phenomenon as a religion, as these are our creators, they're our space brothers, they're going to come back someday. It's all the hallmarks of a religion rather than a scientific venture. Now, I fully do believe and accept that the government studies these things, as well they should. This is something that Derek and I talk about quite adamantly on pretty much every interview that we do, is that yes, we should have scientific studies of these things. Because, well, I mean, first, what if it is ET, or what if it is something extra dimensional, or what if it's newly formed technology and developments from enemy countries? These are all possibilities that we have to take in effect. So I'm like Derek. I'm glad that the government is studying this. Now, where I kind of get nervous is, what is the government going to use this for? Are they going to use this as a power play on the rest of us? I think that's probably likely. If we look at the history of pretty much every government ever,
Right.
that kind of seems to be the tact. If you can get more power using something, especially something mysterious like this. In the past, it's been certain religions and things like that.
So, Josh, are you
Sure,
suggesting
I could
that this
see
is
them
all
using
leading
it
up
towards
to,
those ends.
is this all sort of then perhaps potentially leading up to something like a Project Bluebeam? Is that where we're heading?
The holographic,
Yeah.
the idea that,
Of an alien invasion.
I try to take things with as much evidence as possible, and I haven't heard anything convincing about Bluebeam that would necessarily make me too nervous about it. But let's say, for sake of argument, that type of holographic technology does exist, and some type of there's a lot of different scenarios on how this could be used nefariously. Some type of alien invasion, or even going as far as some type of projected second coming of Christ. That scenario has been put out there. I just don't see the amount of money, for one thing, it would take to implement something like that worldwide is insane. But it would, if I'm understanding the argument right, it would still be holograms, right? These things.
That's
these
my
projections
understanding, yes.
Wouldn't actually be able to have any kind of physical attributes. So, it would be really easy. It seems like it'd be really easy to debunk. I think the government most likely is just going to kind of leave us to our own devices, let us believe certain things that we might believe in, and then use those towards their own end. For example, if Roswell wasn't an actual ET UFO crash, what if it was something else, an experiment they were working on with either Japanese captives or kids with progeria or something horrible like that? What? And I'm not even saying that that's a definite thing. But what if that was the case? Wouldn't it make sense that the government might say, the whole ET thing, that bodes a lot better for us. Let's kind of try to steer the public towards that.
All right, let me jump in here.
Otherwise, we're in a lot of trouble here.
Okay. Josh Peck, Derek Gilbert, Victor Viggiani, stay with us. Back on the other side, more of our discussion on the secret UFO study conducted by the Pentagon. Stay right here on The Conspiracy Show. My name is Richard Syrett.
To Zoomer Radio in Toronto, CFZM AM 740, and CFZM FM 96.7 in downtown Toronto. Owned and operated by MZ Media Incorporated. Zoomer Radio, timeless hits. Live from Toronto, Canada, Earth, The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett on Zoomer Radio.
Thanks for inviting me into your home, long haul truck, RV, camper, taxi, your parents' basement, your loft, that greasy spoon just off the interstate, and your cabin in the woods. Welcome to hour 2 of this transmission. We are discussing the secret Pentagon UFO study. This was a story that was exposed on December the 16th in the New York Times. Let me read from this again now that I have my computer up and working. Glowing, now my mouth isn't working. Glowing auras and black money, the Pentagon's mysterious UFO program. Again, authors Helene Cooper, Ralph Blumenthal, and Leslie Kane. In the $600 billion annual Defense Department budgets, the $22 million spent on the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program was almost impossible to find, which was how the Pentagon wanted it. For years, the program investigated reports of unidentified flying objects, according to Defense Department officials, interviews with program participants, and records obtained by the New York Times. It was run by a military intelligence official, Luis Elizondo, on the 5th floor of the Pentagon's C Ring, deep within the building's maze. The Defense Department has never before acknowledged the existence of the program, which it says it shut down in 2012. But its backers say that while the Pentagon ended funding for the effort at that time, the program remains in existence. For the past 5 years, they say, officials with the program have continued to investigate episodes brought to them by service members while also carrying out their other Defense Department duties. The shadowy program, parts of it remain classified, began in 2007, and initially it was largely funded at the request of Harry Reid, the Nevada Democrat who was the Senate Majority Leader at the time and who has long had an interest in space phenomena. Most of the money went to an aerospace research company run by a billionaire entrepreneur and longtime friend of Mr. Reid's, Robert Bigelow, who is currently working with NASA to produce expandable craft for humans to use in space. On CBS's 60 Minutes in May, Mr. Bigelow said he was absolutely convinced that aliens exist and that UFOs have visited Earth. Working with Mr. Bigelow's Las Vegas-based company, the program produced documents that describe sightings of aircraft that seemed to move at very high velocities, with no visible signs of propulsion, or that hovered with no apparent means of lift. Officials with the program have also studied videos of encounters between unknown objects and American military aircraft, including one released in August of a whitish oval object about the size of a commercial plane chased by 2 Navy FA-18F fighter jets from the aircraft carrier Nimitz off the coast of San Diego back in 2004. Mr. Reid, who retired from Congress this year, said he was proud of the program. Quote, "I'm not embarrassed or ashamed or sorry I got this thing going," end quote, Mr. Reid said in a recent interview in Nevada. "I think it's one of the good things I did in my congressional service. I've done something that no one has done before." All right, joining us on the panel, Victor Viggiani, the executive director of Zealand Communications, and Derek Gilbert and Josh Peck, co-authors of The Day the Earth Stands Still, Unmasking the Old Gods Behind ETs, UFOs, and the Official Disclosure Movement. Now, we have sort of had a kind of a far-flung philosophical discussion. I want to bring it back to the Pentagon program, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, and talk about the video that was released in August. But I believe as part of the New York Times story, they also released the Pentagon also released the transcripts of the conversations that the pilots that encountered this aircraft had. I want to bring it back to you, Victor.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts of this video, this U.S. military jet encountering this unknown object? This again dates back to 2004 off the coast of San Diego.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's very interesting the way the video was played out. I looked at it several times, and I compared it quite closely to a video that was, ironically enough, distributed by the Mexican Air Force when they had their jets. I'm not sure exactly what kind of jets they were that saw the objects, a fleet of objects. And I can't even recall the year, but it was relatively recently, and these jets captured with their gun cameras and infrared cameras virtually the same kind of activity of a group of objects, and very similar in nature. And when you listen to the pilots in Spanish speak, they're describing things that are doing weird maneuvers in the sky, and you get the same kind of crackling voices and all of that. And you compare that to this current video that we're discussing right now, it's very similar in nature.
It was 2004, incidentally. So it's the same year as the U.S.
correct,
Navy
yes.
pilot, 2004, and this was the Mexican Air Force.
That's right, exactly. I'm glad you got that little tidbit of information. In any case, when you compare the two videos, they're very similar. So what does that mean? Does that mean that both the Mexican Air Force and the United States Air Force are fabricating these things to throw everybody a curveball and to cast more doubt on what these objects might be and on all those questions, or is it a real phenomenon that they're seeing? There's no middle ground here. There's something either real or not real about it, and I think we have to deal with that at the level of specificity that we can. There's no way that we can actually prove that these pilots saw that kind of thing unless, you open up a congressional hearing on the specific incident, and with, testifying in front of a congressional group as to the veracity of what these pilots saw. And even that might not even get the information out. So we're always going to be confronted by doubt in this whole situation. And I might remind our listeners that this is not the first time that the United States government has launched some sort of diatribe at the people who are attempting to hide the information. Back in 1960, Roscoe Hillenkotter, Vice Admiral in the Navy, the first the director of the CIA, said very, very clearly that this issue had to be looked at, and it's time for the truth to be brought out about these flying saucers or these UFOs. So the Congress has been challenged many, many times to bring this information forward, and I see this particular video as fairly good, fairly substantial evidence that this thing needs to be looked at in an official way by Congress, and not necessarily to give it validity, but to give it its place in history, and to allow people to hear their elected representatives toss around terms like extraterrestrial or UFOs or different kinds of free energy propulsion systems and not ours, all that kind of language that we need to engage in to raise the idea that these craft just may not be our own. So I think this video really points to the fact that we need to look at this a little bit more carefully than we're doing right now.
So it may in the end be nothing more than a conversation starter, and we can quibble as to whether it's real or not. Now, your colleague and a good friend of the program as well, Grant Cameron, recently interviewed John Lear, aviator John Lear, and John Lear, not convinced at all, that's putting it lightly, that this is he thinks this particular video is a complete fabrication. But that doesn't obviously that doesn't change your perspective in terms of, okay, well, we can argue that, but let's do it in front of a congressional hearing.
Yeah, I think the whole idea of a court of law or some sort of body that can really, as I said earlier, raise the level of conversation and inquiry about what this stuff really is. And then it's just a starting point. As you say, it's a conversation starter. that most people, most in media, most television networks just aren't willing to have. And I think that the idea of everybody on the planet trying to put bread on their table and provide their families with clean drinking water and an education, that's what they're concerned about right now. And that's all fine and good. I think we need to be concerned about those issues, but we also need to be concerned about the fate of the planet. And I think that kind of conversation will lead us into that direction of raising the larger issues of what this phenomenon just might be.
Derek and Josh, did you have a comment on the video that was released?
Well, sure. Now, I'm certainly no video editing or video fabrication expert. There are a few, because I actually do video editing for a living, but fabrication is something totally different. There are a few telltale signs to say if something is faked. Now, that's not definitive, because if the government wanted to fabricate something, they're going to have sophisticated stuff that it would be way beyond my expertise. The couple of little telltale things that come up that most people don't think about when they make there are people out there that'll make UFO videos for YouTube, and a lot of the stuff that people don't normally think about, they're easy to pick out. I didn't get any of that in either video, the one that recently came out, and then the one that Victor talked about from a few years ago, because I remember that one as well. But again, it's the government, so I wouldn't expect to, if they're going to fabricate a video, it's probably going to look pretty good. Now, at the same time,
I think we need to remember, though, that the Department of Defense said that they aren't the ones who released this video. So this is not something that came from the Department of Defense, at least not officially. This is something that Luis Elizondo, who resigned from the Department of Defense to take a rather lucrative position with this new company, to the Stars Academy.
The Tom DeLonge outfit, yes. Mm-hmm.
Right. So is this actually a government op, or again, are we out of line in asking, is this just a marketing ploy for a company that is still soliciting for investors on the front page, the landing page of its website?
Interesting. Well, that's a very cynical world view, I suppose. But hey, we have to be cynical. Those of us that have been around long enough to be beaten down come by that perspective honestly, no question.
Sure.
Derek and Josh.
We could even talk about, like, what if it were real? What's more scary? And this actually might be why the government seems to be hiding something. Maybe the thing that they're hiding, and this is something that I've thought about throughout the whole process of writing this book. Is it more scary to think that the government is hiding actual knowledge? They know what this is, but they don't want to tell us. Or is it even scarier that maybe they don't know either? Maybe they're in the same boat as we are. Maybe they know a couple little things that we don't, but overall they don't know what this phenomena is, and that's the thing that they're actually hiding from the rest of us. Because if anything's going to throw people into mass hysteria, I could see that being something.
There is a third, perhaps even a scarier option. They know exactly what it is, but there's nothing anybody can do about it. We'll discuss. Derek Gilbert, Josh Peck, Victor Viggiani, stay with us. Our roundtable, the UFO study conducted in secret by the Pentagon, will continue after this timeout.
When in doubt, blame the government. You're listening to The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio. Looking back, this is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett.
Just a programming note. Next week on The Conspiracy Show, blogger, podcast host George Freund will be with me to kind of a look back at 2017 and a look ahead at 2018, and we'll cover a lot of ground. We'll talk geopolitics, we'll talk artificial intelligence, the transhumanist movement, political intrigue, subterfuge. Then in the second hour, Rosemary Ellen Guiley will be with me to talk about curses. We'll talk about the Hope Diamond, the James Dean curse, and also kind of a paranormal news roundup, some interesting stories in the news of a paranormal nature. Right now, we continue with our 2-hour roundtable discussion on the secret Pentagon study, and the actual name is the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. The Pentagon insists, or the Defense Department rather insists, it was shut down in 2012. However, the whistleblower, the man at the center of this story, the military intelligence official Luis Elizondo, says that's not true. It is ongoing. In fact, he says they have named a successor after he stepped down in October, which is rather interesting. Let me get Victor Viggiani back in here and get your reaction to Elizondo's statement that, and he wrote a letter to Defense Secretary General Mattis, saying that I don't know why we're not paying more attention to this, certainly echoing your sentiments, but the fact that they have named a successor, that's rather interesting, wouldn't you say, Victor?
Yes, I would say it's extremely interesting, and I think that any indication that this program is continuing quite well proves my point that this has been going on for a long, long time, and we only know a little bit about what's really going on behind the scenes. And I think that something like this, to name a successor to a program, means that they have either in some way, shape, or form extended some sort of funding for this particular program, or in some other way they're doing it on a shoestring. But the fact of the matter is that the investigation continues, and I think that it would be foolish of anyone to even assume remotely that the United States government would toss all of this investigation into the waste bin and just let it stay there and rot. That just simply is not happening, cannot happen, because everything that all of our fine researchers, Richard Dolan, Stanton Friedman, Nick Pope, all of these people clearly have indicated with specific documents, historical documents dating back to the early 1950s, that the government has been doing this for a long time. Now, my question would be, if the successor does have his reins, on horses that are pulling this whole chariot forward into newer realms of investigation, I think it's incumbent upon the new boss of this Pentagon program to come forward and begin to release some of their investigation findings. What, in fact, have they found with this $2 million allotment? What are some of the specific things that they have come to learn about the extraterrestrial presence or UFOs or whatever these things might be? And the big conundrum that I'm faced with is, why would they be examining, unless they're not part of the shadow government, why would they be examining their own craft? That to me is an untenable position. If they think that they're investigating their own craft, they're seriously deceiving themselves. That this is, that's like looking in the mirror and not recognizing yourself. It just doesn't make any sense at all. So, by default, the default position, they must be examining something that is not within the wheelhouse of what our craft can do. They must be examining craft of some sort of non-Earth origin. So, I mean, if there is a new person in charge, he's got a lot of questions to answer before he begins to delve more deeply into this.
Derek and Josh, your thoughts on Victor's statement that there's no way that the Pentagon would be investigating their own craft. What about the idea of compartmentalization? You know, one hand doesn't necessarily know what the other hand is doing, and this is how secrecy is maintained and how conspiracies are crafted, essentially.
Right. I'll say one quick thing, and then I'll pass it off to Derek. But no, I don't believe even in the most mundane interpretations of this phenomena that we're examining our own craft. That, you know, like Victor said, that would be it's ridiculous. But enemy craft. Now it might be that, and if it is actual enemy craft, then again, even I don't believe it could all be that. But even if a certain percentage is, I could see why possibly the government might want to kind of hide behind the UFO phenomena to shield away from that. But I'll pass it off to Derek.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Pentagon has a responsibility to the citizens of the United States to investigate things that they don't know, that they can't identify, just on the chance that it's something coming from another nation that isn't necessarily friendly. They don't necessarily know everything that's being worked on at the Skunk Works, and so the reports that are coming into them may be of things that they don't know. They may be ours. They may be ours and they know what they are, but then they want to make sure that that information doesn't get to, that they control the release of that information, because it's a craft that we don't want the Russians and the Chinese to know about. But again, in the book, The Day the Earth Stands Still, we take the approach that we can't explain all of these sightings that way. But I think the key to remember is that non-Earth origin doesn't necessarily mean extraterrestrial. And that, I think, is the key distinction. Just because it's not human technology doesn't mean it's extraterrestrial technology.
Exactly. There's a strong case to be made for extra-dimensional type of phenomenon here, and we can get more into that. I probably should mention, just for anybody who might be interested in getting the book, if they go to officialdisclosure.com, we have the book with hundreds of dollars worth of free materials, DVDs, exclusive interviews, things that you cannot find on Amazon included with this book for only $39.99. So you could buy it on Amazon if you only want the book, but if you want to pay just a couple bucks more and get a whole bunch of hundreds of dollars worth of extra books and materials and audio series, go to officialdisclosure.com and you'll find the deal there. But yeah, exactly like Derek was saying, well, obviously we wrote the book together, so I agree with him. But yeah, I mean, there could be, for all we know, there could be privatized American companies that the government doesn't really know what they're developing. And maybe they're looking into that. So there's a lot of complexities to this question.
Well, Derek and Josh, would it be, let me get your reaction to this. Let's say, for example, that we are talking about extraterrestrials and that they do hold the secret to interstellar propulsion, free energy. This is certainly sort of the hope and the dream, the aspirations of many in the ufology community, that these extraterrestrials are, I guess, in some measure here to save us from ourselves, and they hold the key to, as I say, free energy, a world without disease. Could that stand alongside your Christian worldview?
Oh, absolutely, yes, and that's something that we address. That's something we address in the book, and it gets back to what Josh was discussing in the previous hour. When you look at a proper understanding of the verse in chapter 1 of Genesis, where God said, "Let us create man in our image." Being created in God's image doesn't mean that God is a biped that stands about 6 feet tall. It means we are his image bearers. We are his moral agents on earth, his representatives on earth. And if by some chance ET from Zeta Reticuli lands on the White House lawn, Klaatu steps out of his saucer with Gort, his robot, that does not change our status as God's imagers on this planet. That would be fantastic if we actually found ET existed out there in the universe. Not that we believe that there's any concrete evidence that this has actually happened at this point, but if it were to happen, it would not affect and should not affect the faith of Christians at all. And that's one of the main reasons we wrote the book.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that question. If they did, if ET did have, you know, all these wonderful things that they could do to help us out, and maybe they do. Well, what are they waiting for? I mean, if they've been visiting us for thousands of years already, and they've always had this, like, my question would be, what are they waiting for? What do we have to do? Because they haven't clearly spelled it out. And that's why I say, and Derek, you know, we both kind of agree on this, that it's this question is more of a religious one in nature, because the same could be asked about God. Well, God is all powerful, so why do bad things happen to good people? Well, he's provided a way out of that through Jesus Christ. You know, there's a clear plan to have some hope after death. Now, there are those who will reject that, you know, fine, but at least the you know, the plan is there, whether somebody wants to accept it or not. When it comes to the ET question,
I was going to say the existence of these other extra-dimensional entities have some role to play in why bad things happen to good people. It fits within a Christian worldview.
Yes, if it's extra-dimensional in nature, absolutely. And I'm going to turn that loose on Derek. I'm going to let him explain that because he does a better job than I. But if it's extraterrestrial and they have all of these things, well, what's the plan? How do we attain that? Because as far as we know, they've never sent a cohesive radio signal or an email, or you know, I'm being a little flippant about it, but I mean, they've never had any kind of real direct contact. It's always something subjective, like telepathy through some seer or something, and then they all have different answers. Well, it's some type of evolvement of humankind, and you got to do what we say, and then you'll eventually get there. But there's no clear plan set in place. Now, if it's the extra-dimensional hypothesis, if that's true, in my opinion and Derek's opinion, and I think to any logical person who looks at all the evidence, there is a clear answer to all of that. And like Derek mentioned just a moment ago, they're a part of the problem. They're a part of why we're in this state to begin with.
All right, let me throw sort of the same question, but coming at it from the opposite end, and that's to Victor. Victor, would it be fair to say that by and large in the UFO community, if you make the suggestion or you make the assertion that we are talking about interdimensionals and that they are more than likely, you know, from the demonic realm, and that this is all part of a great deception, would it be fair to say that that particular narrative, that dog won't hunt by and large in the UFO community, or at least you'd get yourself removed from a lot of Christmas card lists?
It's a good point. Well, the whole interdimensional aspect of this is something that I've entertained for a long while. As a matter of fact, Jacques Vallée was the first one who suggested that kind of narrative.
Masters of deception. That's
right. So that, I mean, in this whole situation, it is definitely a battle over worldviews. I mean, we've heard all of us this evening discuss different worldviews about how this scenario can play out. And it's a lot like there's two aspects to this. It's a lot like playing a hockey game, Richard, between two teams. You know, you got one puck, then all of a sudden somebody throws another 15 pucks on the ice, and you got to deal with all these pucks and try to make sense of the game. Now that you've got 15 pucks instead of just one. And we're in a state of confusion about this. So it requires us to come up with some sort of methodology of understanding something much more complex than I think we can ever really possibly, with our limited human understanding. It's a lot like, you know, your dog watching you leave for work in the morning, okay? Your dog has no idea where you're going, what you're going to do, when you're coming back. All he knows, he sees you get in this machine and leave. That's all he knows. He's never going to be able to understand what's really going on. So what happens when some sort of clarity is brought to this issue and that dog realizes that, oh, That's what's going on. That's the kind of thing that I'm hoping for. So if in fact the answer comes interdimensionally, whether it becomes, point A to point B within our own, galaxy, or somehow through some sort of wormhole in the universe, it really doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is we had better be prepared to deal with the implications of whatever happens, whichever scenario it is. And I think that's the kind of preparation that we need to be talking about here, is how will humanity, how will the human family deal with what's really going on, whatever that might be. The only scenario that's not acceptable to me is that we are alone. That to me is there's no credence to that issue at all as far as I'm concerned. But if you look at the other side of that argument, the fact that there are other beings out there wherever they're from, I think that's the key issue that we have to deal with, and what the implications are of the realization and acknowledgement of that by the human family.
All right, stay put, all of you. We will reassemble in mere moments and continue to discuss what is really shaping up to be one of the great stories of 2017 into 2018. The Defense Department's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, the Pentagon's secret UFO study. Derek Gilbert, Josh Peck, The Day the Earth Stands Still. Victor Viggiani, Executive Director, Zealand Communications. Back with more right here on The Conspiracy Show.
Shaking the world and seeing what falls. This is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio. Right here, The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
Welcome back. Here's something I think we can say with certainty, and I know Victor will be delighted with this, and that is that the treatment this issue, UFOs and ETs, gets in the mainstream media will never be the same. It started with this story, December the 16th, 2017, about this secret Pentagon UFO study. And then there was a follow-up piece a couple of weeks later in the New York Times. This was by a senior writer by the name of Dan Barry at the New York Times. And this was published in the New York Times Sunday Review section. He writes, "The year now ending has been so laden with tumultuous news that one astounding report in the exhausted final days of 2017 seemed almost routine. that for years an intelligence official borrowed within the Pentagon, Warren, was running a secret program to investigate reports of unidentified flying objects. Beg your pardon? That scoop by Helene Cooper, Ralph Blumenthal, and Leslie Kean for the New York Times was underscored by a companion article that detailed how in 2004 an oval object played a game of aeronautic hide-and-seek off Southern California with 2 Navy fighter jets assigned to the aircraft carrier Nimitz. The object then zipped away at a speed so otherworldly that it left one of the Navy pilots later saying he felt, quote, pretty weirded out, end quote, as you might if you watch the video of the encounter that the Department of Defense has made public. In considering these reports, my mind turned to all those reasonable people who were dismissed and ridiculed over the years because they believed that something was out there. I thought in particular of believers who had died without savoring these official revelations, believers like my late father. I can hear what he would have said there at the veterans' home, his broken vessel of a body in a wheelchair, but his mind is quick and bright as a shooting star. I've been saying it for years, he'd assert, followed by a choice epithet he reserved for government officials, followed by, I knew it, then a satisfying drag on a cigarette. That's Dan Barry writing in the Sunday Review of the New York Times. And again, what strikes me is the serious tone. We are seeing here a sea change. Whatever else we might say, whether this Pentagon study was is a covert hoax, whether it's legitimate, whether we're talking about extraterrestrials, interdimensionals, one thing we know on the ground, journalism and its treatment of this issue has forever changed. Derek, Josh, your thoughts?
Well, since I overshadowed Derek in the last run, I'll let Derek take this one. You got to throw him a bone every now and then.
Well, I appreciate that. Josh likes to, give the old man a break. He likes to remind me that my radio career began 4 years before he was born. So,
yeah, every chance I get.
Ouch.
Yeah. So, I think, and we would agree, it is good to see that this is not being treated as a joke, because for too long, this is a phenomenon that has been used as a kicker story on the evening news. And you'll never believe what so-and-so saw. Well, okay, no, finally, to see this in the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, Fox News, getting some serious treatment, I think is a good thing. And again, not to beat this point too hard, but coming at this from a Christian perspective, Josh and I are delighted to see this, because we think it's an important subject that Christians need to address, because it is a worldview shaping belief system. And I think if you look at the again, the website of To the Stars Academy, but even before that, and this is a subject that Josh covered in depth in the book, the WikiLeaks emails released from John Podesta's account included several contacts, emails from the late Dr. Edgar Mitchell, sixth man on the moon, very intelligent man, co-founder of the Institute for Noetic Sciences, but one who believed that we had been contacted by extraterrestrials who wanted to share with us the secrets of zero-point energy and other wonderful technology, as long as we promised to be peaceful in our dealings with the contiguous universe. This, I think, is something that we need to address as Christians. Again, as critical thinkers, we need to ask the question, okay, we don't deny, Josh and me, that contactees are hearing from something out there, but how do we vet their claims? How do we verify that these are actually extraterrestrial entities? How do we know they're not lying to us when they come to us and say, we're here to serve man? How do we know that's not the title of their cookbook?
Well, it is interesting that a number of prominent UFO researchers, Jacques Vallée, I would say Dr. David Jacobs, and then Nick Redfern, who I think is just a fabulous writer, have all sort of come around to this idea that, to take the steal the title of Jacques Vallée's book, The Masters of Deception, there is an element of deception going on, which sort of leads into, I believe, sort of your understanding of what this issue is all about, that there is a level of deception here.
Right, and I mean the late Carla Turner was on that trajectory as well, and that what's really convincing about all this is it's not just a Christian thing, I mean it's people.
No, Dr. David Jacobs is I believe is an atheist, if I'm not mistaken. Dr. David Jacobs.
Right.
Right, yeah, exactly. Actually, I think most of the prominent UFO researchers, most of the people who are in the spotlight now, I don't know of any of them that are actually necessarily Christian. You know, I mean, I'm sure there's one or two, but the ones that in the UFO community, if you were to mention their name, that they would recognize.
Right, L.A. Marzulli would be one of the more prominent.
Well, sure, yeah, and he's a good friend of ours, and we love LA to death. But I like with people like LA, like Derek, like myself, people like Joe Jordan, Guy Malone, Gary Bates. There's a whole lot of people who do subscribe to that. I think they're probably more well known in the Christian community than they are in the UFO community, and I might be wrong on that.
No, there's definitely a schism there.
Not on any statistics.
Yeah, they don't get invited to those parties. There's a real schism. Wouldn't you agree, Victor?
Oh, for sure. I mean, having been around within this community for a large number of years, 4 decades, I've seen this community become, everybody becomes a whipping boy at some point. No matter what feature of this whole issue you espouse, somebody jumps all over your back at one point or another to either advance their own theory or denigrate the one that you're trying to put forward. And
right. If you have the wrong opinion, suddenly you're Majestic 12.
Of course, right. Yeah, and you're categorized as well. I don't know. You want to know what the categories really are, but the fact of the matter is that you become ostracized for one reason or another. And so what happens is, people take this middle ground approach just to remove themselves from the scathing ridicule of their so-called colleagues. I think you really have to run up the middle with this whole idea and say, listen, folks, let's just stand back here and see what's really going on, and quit trying to advance your own personal view of this whole thing. And that's why I think some of the really good researchers in this area, namely people that I respect highly, like Richard Dolan and Steve Bassett and Grant Cameron, our Canadian cohort here, these people are trying to get at, it sounds banal, they're trying to get at the truth, and they're trying to unravel a very, very tangled ball of string. So it's quite clear that the dialogue going on within the UFO community is just as caustic as the dialogue going on inside of some of these intelligence agencies as to what we should do in terms of compartmentalization and all of that. So we're really the victim of our own demise.
All right, we'll pick this up on the other side. The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett continues in mere moments.
If you're sure your phone isn't tapped, call now, 416-360-0740, or toll free at 1-866-740-4740. Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
I'm sure there's an interesting backstory, which we'll save for another time. But and that is how Blumenthal, Cooper, and Leslie Kean managed to get this story into the Sunday New York Times. I mean, that must have been a Herculean effort. It must have taken, I'm guessing, years. What do you think, Derek?
Well, it's curious again that the New York Times and other mainstream media sources have decided to pick up and run with the story. And I am just old enough and skeptical enough to again ask the question: is there something going on there that we need to poke at a little bit harder? It's funny how many of us will be skeptical of the mainstream media until they publish something that we agree with that kind of confirms our existing bias. They finally noticed the story, so now we finally got validation. Well, yeah, but 2 weeks ago we were complaining that they never print anything that that any real news regarding what the government's up to. So, I guess my question is, why now? Why is this suddenly become an acceptable topic for the mainstream media to cover where it wasn't previously? And that's a question I honestly don't have a good answer for at this point.
Well, part of maybe the clue is the fact that the response from the readership was so tremendous that, for a newspaper that is trying to figure out what the next business model is, maybe again, that's very cynical. Maybe that's part of the equation. What do you think, Josh?
Typically, this is the kind of story you only see covered by the red tops in the UK, like the Sun and the Star and the Express. So I don't know. Not to cast aspersions on them or to suggest that the New York Times is going that direction, but it is interesting because those stories are clickbait, no question.
Victor, did you want to jump in? Do you know any of the, I mean, you've talked to Leslie Kean. Do you know any of the backstory here? How she managed, how long, what was involved in getting the New York Times?
Really,
obviously a lot of vetting.
Yeah, I can't say specifically, Richard. I have not spoken to Leslie about it. I have spoken to Leslie about other things, some time ago, but I have no way of knowing, what really motivated and what the mechanics were as to how the editorial staff, at that particular newspaper decided to do this. The image in my mind is that if you recall the movie All the President's Men, and Ben Bradley and Katharine Graham were sitting in the room, in the editorial room, and tossing around the idea of whether or not to go with Woodward and Bernstein's story. And there was a huge silence, and I forget which one of them said it, but one of them said, "Let's go for it." And I think it was just made like almost a flip of a coin. And this could be that spontaneous. It could be, okay, I think the time is now. I think the evidence is there. The dialogue is there. We've got all the backup stories from people that are involved in this. And that you can bet that there's other corroboration going on too. So I think, as was mentioned earlier, that there's something going on behind the scenes where this is not just a whale kind of, surfacing a little bit. It's almost like a breach. And once that breach is recognized by the rest of the media, there's just no way this thing is going to be stopped. And it's going to be definitely a sea change as to how the general public gets to view this. If the media continues a sustained amount of coverage, that's the whole key. This cannot be just a story that rises and falls as a flag might in the morning. This flag has to fly for a long time in order to be considered serious. And I think that good journalism, and I think if Leslie's involved in it, she will propel this thing forward, even if her own, sentiment is countered by any other journalistic approach. She will find a way to get this thing to the surface because she's probably one of the best at manipulating this issue to the front pages of newspapers. Destined by her book, they rose to number 29 on the New York Times bestseller list. That's got to tell you something right there.
Derek and Josh, the fact that the Pentagon spent initially anyway, just $22 million. If this was of such import, delving into this, what is at stake is potentially, the answers to most of our existential questions and perhaps even things like free energy. Why just $22 million?
I know, right? I mean, that doesn't seem like a whole lot. Well, I'm going to say my little quick thing, and then I'm going to pass it off to Derek. But kind of going in with the last question, and here's here's where I joke with Derek about his age, and we laugh, and I'm like a young whippersnapper who won't get off his lawn, and he's like some old guy. But no, seriously, Derek's been an amazing inspiration to me, a big source of information, to say the absolute least. I didn't grow up with a dad or anything, and Derek's done a lot to fulfill a lot of those roles. Okay, I don't want to get too mushy into it, but the main point being, I don't remember a time in my life where I've watched the news. I'm only 33. I'm relatively young. I don't remember a time in my life where I've watched the news and the UFO phenomenon, alien abduction, anything with that has actually been taken seriously by the mainstream media. Just has never happened. Now, maybe because I'm too young to know, maybe this is part of the cycle. Maybe there has been times in the past where this has been taken seriously, and maybe it's like a waning and waxing kind of thing.
Yeah, for about 24 hours in Roswell in 1947.
To Derek and the rest of you for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, you asked a really good question, Richard. Why just $22 million if the UFO phenomenon is something that the Pentagon wanted to take seriously? Because as we've learned over the past couple of years, and maybe you remember back in 2001, just before 9/11, on 9/10, then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld said they couldn't find something like $2.5 trillion in the Defense Department budget. But just last year, and it was disclosed that the Defense Department was missing something like $6 trillion in just one quarter, which is why the Trump administration has announced it's going to start auditing the Department of Defense for the first time ever. So $22 million is a drop in the bucket when you're talking about, an organization so huge that it can lose $6 trillion in unauthorized adjustments to its books in one quarter of 1 year alone. Is it simply, and Jason Colavito, who tracks things like this with a skeptical eye, and does an excellent job at it from that standpoint, is it just simply that the former Senator Harry Reid, who got this into the Defense Department budget, is buddies with Robert Bigelow? Because as the New York Times reported, most of it went to Robert Bigelow. And that's something you have to pick up carefully as you're reading through the article. But it might just be him throwing a bone to a political supporter. I mean, I think I can add something to this conversation now in terms of $22 million with the Pentagon. I think we have to look at other organizations, specifically NASA, who knows that these things are coming and going with impunity. They see these fast walkers come and go. Those some of the information that's been related to me. That's number one, and the kind of money that they're expending to expose this, because Leslie Kean did in fact successfully sue NASA for their documents about the Kecksburg incident back in 1965. That's number one. Number two, I have information from NORAD directly, the NORAD commander, and Richard will back me up on this one because I released this information back in 2016. The NORAD commander sent me a threatening letter indicating that anyone in possession of information about these unknown tracks and the distribution of this information could be indicted against the National Security Act. And he admitted at the bottom of the letter that NORAD, over the past 5 years, has an average of 1,800 contacts with craft of unknown identity. And number two, over the last 5 years, they have an average of 75 intercepts. This is stated in a letter directly to me by the NORAD commander. So there's a whole lot of other stuff that's going on, not just Pentagon dabbling in this with $22 million. Well, that's a really good point, Victor. I mean, the $22 million is all that was officially reported. Again, when you're missing $6 trillion per quarter from the budget, how much of that is just being flushed around to cover this sort of investigation?
Right.
Yeah, the 22 million. I mean, the Pentagon, this is an organization that spends $100,000 on a hammer. So 22 million should cover postage and letterhead, I would think. Let me ask you, Derek and Josh, we just have a few minutes here, but if you had Luis Elizondo in a room right now, rattle off a couple of questions you'd ask him.
Oh, gosh. Well, yeah, I've actually seen a couple of posts he's put on the public fora, and he seems to be sincere. At least that's the public persona that he's put forward. I guess I would ask, why are you going public with this now? What convinced you to leave government service and pursue this in the private sector? I'd want to know that.
Well, he seemed to answer that, I think, in his resignation letter to General Mattis. He said he just got fed up with the secrecy.
But why not do it through MUFON? Why take a for-profit position with a
I see
company
what you're
like
saying.
DeLong?
Yeah, interesting point. All right, Josh, did you want to add one as well? A question?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably go along with Derek on that. I mean, and anytime I interview somebody, and I do this for a living, I host a show called Into the Multiverse. I frequently co-host SkyWatchTV with Derek. We've interviewed, I wouldn't even know how many people now. My main interest is to know what their bias is. Bias isn't like a negative, evil, bad word. Everybody has one. You know, everyone. I have one. You have one. Everyone's going to have one. I'm interested to know what that is, and then, okay, what's the information that you have? What's the facts, and how is that filtered through your bias? That's what I would want to know first, because I don't know anything about him. I don't know. I don't know his upbringing. I don't know his religious affiliation, if there is any. I don't know what he believes about. I know nothing about him. I would want to know that first, because that's going to tell me more about the information he provides than really the objective information itself.
All right, Victor, a quick question.
I would want to know that.
Okay. Your question to Alessandro would be what, Victor?
My question would be, why did you, similar to what I just heard a moment ago, but why would you have done this direction in terms of releasing this information in a dialogue with Tom DeLong? Why wouldn't you have sat down with a recognized journalist or a news agency, something like CBS or NBC or ABC, whatever, and sat down and do a tell-all with a news organization that could bring this stuff forward full force without questioning anybody's motives about, you know, investments and the other things that are going on with the To the Stars Academy? Why wouldn't he have done it in a more pristine way to really convince the general public that he was serious about telling the story in a proper way?
Well, gentlemen, that is a wrap on our 2-hour roundtable discussion. And once again, I just want to mention and thank Derek Gilbert, Josh Peck, The Day the Earth Stands Still. Gentlemen, how do we get the book?
Official disclosure.
Well, you can go to... I had a feeling that was going to happen. Since I did the first pitch, Derek, I'll let you take this one.
Officialdisclosure.com. Just click on the link there, and that'll get you to the best deal. You can find it at Amazon, of course, but we got a really good deal through SkyWatch TV, and that's linked at officialdisclosure.com.
And how can we watch you on SkyWatch TV?
SkyWatchTV.com or the SkyWatch TV channel on Roku, Apple TV, or the SkyWatch TV mobile app.
Derek and Josh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Victor, how do we read your dispatches at Zealand Communications?
Well, once again, just Google our moniker, Zealand Communications, and just Google that, and you'll come up with our blog site with all of our press releases and editorials.
Victor, thank you again, my friend.
A pleasure, as always.
Ian Robertson, Albert Vinzel, Ryan White, thank you all. Back next week with a brand new program. In the meantime, don't be afraid. There's nothing concealed that won't be revealed and nothing hidden that won't be made known. What you hear in the dark, speak in the light. What I say in a whisper, proclaim from the housetops. Move over, Aphrodite. I'm coming home. Thanks, North. Good night.